Blog Talk Radio.
Tonight. Alright! We're gonna have a TV party, alright! Tonight! We've got nothing better to do than watch TV and have a couple of brews. Everybody's gonna hang out here tonight! Alright! We'll pass out on the couch. Alright! Tonight! We got nothing better to do.
All right, people. We've had a bit of a delay, but I think we've got it now. Let's see if the Blog Talk Radio lady can hear me. Madam, can you hear me? Tommy, can you hear me? Yep, that's me. All right, let's do a second test here. Let's see if I can hear my guest and he can hear me. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Oh, hot damn. We have a show. All right. I'm not sure what happened there, but we as happens with Blog Talk Radio from time to time, there are technical difficulties. The difficulty being I couldn't hear anything and no one could hear me. I mean, and you could have a show without a host. I just don't know how well it would go. But we're here. It's TV Party tonight. We will be discussing Chef's Table, and I am your host, the mandated reporter, and frankly, I'm mortified, Mr. Mark Radulich. And my guest tonight, who can hear me, and I can hear him, is Mark Roth. How you doing, Mark?
Oh, not too bad. And you?
A little sweaty, a little frantic, a little annoyed. But other than that, I'm doing just dandy.
Well, just like in the kitchen, it's never how bad you fuck up. It's always how you bounce back.
Indeed. Speaking of bouncing back, let's do that. Now, I at the beginning of this year, I had been watching the documentary Cooked, the 4-part documentary on Netflix, put out by Michael Pollan, whose books I very much enjoy. And I happened to mention, just sort of offhandedly on Facebook, I was like, hey, this is something I think I'd like to talk about. And you and some others immediately answered the call wanting to talk about it. And I said, okay, well, I've got somebody in mind for this, but if you're really interested in talking about another food documentary series on Netflix, I've got one in mind later in the year. And that brings us to tonight. I had seen Chef's Table in the queue on Netflix. I really didn't know anything about it, but I'm a huge fan of food television competition shows. I like to watch them with my wife and my daughter. I'm into it just in general. I watch a lot of food documentaries. So when I saw it, I said, okay, well, I think I want to talk about this one too, and I'm going to pick somebody else who was into it. What made you decide to answer the call, Mr. Roth? Why did you want to jump into the podcast world and talk Chef's Table?
Well, I was a professional chef for 14 years, so I like to look at it from time to time and exercise my brain, so to speak.
Tell us a little bit about your experience as a chef. Where did you work? What kind of cuisine did you happen to be cooking? And what happened? How come you're no longer a chef?
Well, the last question is the easiest one, just burnout, really. Working as a chef in a kitchen for as long as I have, the hours just kind of get to you. No such thing as a sick day, no real vacation days. You're up, you're in the game.
Sure.
In my career, I've run the gambit from when I was 15 working at a pizzeria all the way up to my last job working in a fine dining Italian establishment.
Outstanding.
Almost everywhere in between.
Now, did you stay in the New York area, or did you migrate around the country? Did you travel across the world? Where did you work?
Mostly in the South, actually. I had my first culinary class in South Carolina, ended up going to Johnson & Wales back when it was still in Charleston, and mainly stayed around the Charlotte metro area.
Okay. Now, had you heard of Chef's Table when I asked you to talk about this with me? Did you know what it was?
It showed up in my queue, just like with you.
Okay. Very good. I have never, other than Dan Barber, who I feel like I saw him on like a Top Chef or something else, and I might be imagining that, but I feel like I've heard of Dan Barber before, but I have no idea who the rest of these people are. This is a 6-episode season, and we're only doing season 1 tonight, and it's Massimo Bottura, Dan Barber, Francis Mallmann. Oh boy, do I have a lot to say about him. Niki Nakayama, Ben Shewry, and Magnus Nilsson, who look like he should be playing guitar in Flames. Yeah, that's an awesome name. I was watching the episode actually before we went live tonight, and I just kept yelling out randomly, Magnus Nilsson from Gothenburg, Sweden, is actually in the band In Flames are from Gothenburg, but it's neither here nor there. So yeah, I had no real foreknowledge of what this was. I just sort of saw it there, popped it on, and I'll tell you, had it not started with Massimo Bottura, I don't know if I would have gotten through all of it. That's not to say it's a bad series, but like if it had started with Francis Mallmann, I don't know if I would have kept watching. What a douchebag! But Massimo had this charisma about him and this sort of boyish enthusiasm. I was really into his story, and it hooked me to watch the rest of the series. Just in general, what did you we're going to break these down episode by episode, chef by chef, but just a sort of a general approach to this thing, what did you think of Chef's Table?
It was very much a documentary. It was meant to highlight the best that each individual had to offer, very generic in terms of their formative years, how they learned to cook. I think actually Massimo was probably the most detailed. And the dishes at the end just it felt like a chef's money shot on my screen.
I was debating how much I wanted to use the term food porn tonight. And I have to say, that's always the best part of any cooking show. If I'm watching like Guy Fieri's Diners, Dives, and whatever the hell it's called, Diners, Drive-In, and Dives, it's always that close-up shot of the food or Top Chef. Where you've watched them, make the sausage and everything, and then finally they do that one shot of the food right before the judges taste it. And that's always the best part of it for me. I very much love the visual aspect of the food on screen, more so than any other part of any of these type of cooking shows. And it was no different with Chef's Table. I didn't get to watch the entire episode of the Magnus Nilsson one just because time ran away from me this week, but I fast forwarded to the very end because that's the part I most look forward to. At the end of the episode, they just run through every dish that they've featured in the episode, and they all have such fun names, especially like Massimo Bottura, like oops, I dropped the lemon tart, shit like that.
Yeah. That story had to be my favorite out of the entire series. Yeah,
I love that. I don't know art and I don't know cooking, but I know what I like. And as somebody who does, dabble in creative efforts such as the world of podcasting, I really enjoy their creative approach to food. And, and some of the more eccentric characters in Chef's Table made the show more enjoyable for me. Again, I go back to Massimo, who we'll just get into talking about him. When that story where it's like the one cook chef dropped it, and he was like, oh my, and he was just beating himself up over, oh my God, I dropped the lemon tart, and it was kind of like, no, stop, it's beautiful. Let's recreate that on the plate. It's genius and madness. There's a fine line. Now, let me ask you: had you heard of any of these people before you watched this show?
I've actually heard of Dan Barber before. Everyone else, though, not really.
Okay.
If I had ever heard of Magnus before, I know I would have. I would have known that.
Sure. Let's get into the first episode here. Mr. Massimo Bottura, whose story is essentially he has a restaurant in Italy, and correct me if I'm a little sketch on detail here, but I think the thing about his first restaurant is he's making a traditional Italian cuisine, but he's doing it in a different style, a style that's sort of upending the tradition. And he leaves that restaurant. He goes to New York. He meets with the woman that ends up becoming his wife. He goes back to Italy. There's a detour into France, back to Italy again, where he opens up Osteria Francescana. And again, we have this situation where he's doing his own take on traditional Italian cooking. And at first, it's not what people want. It pushes people out of their comfort zone. Then I think he gets like a rave review, and suddenly he's the talk of the town, and now he's got the third greatest restaurant in the history of Earth or some shit. So, I loved this episode. I loved this chef. I grew up in an Italian family. I often talk about my Nana and her Italian cooking, and you don't get much. She was not exactly a chef, but she had her dishes, and those dishes always had a lot of sentimental attachment, a lot of memory for me. So this was a fun episode for me to watch. What are some of the things that stood out to you in this episode?
One of the big things was the very opening, that little story about the 10,000 pounds of Parmesan that were damaged in a storm, and he created a new risotto dish that centered around Parmesan and ended up saving the business.
That's a great story. That is an excellent story. And again, another situation where you have to sort of think on your feet and come up with something sort of ingenious. I actually forgot about that, so you mentioned it. And then the dish he creates, with that sort of lattice Parmesan there on top of the Parmesan.
The Parmesan three ways.
Yeah, it looked delicious. It absolutely looked like a delectable dish. I have to say, and maybe this is just me, but where I struggled with every single one of these episodes is, and I do this a lot with cooking shows, I don't care about the people as much. I'm interested in their story to a degree, but there comes a point where I'm just like, I'm only watching this because you make awesome food. I'm not so much interested in you. And I felt like Massimo, because of his charisma and his energy, was fine. But as we get into some of these other chefs, I was like, can we go back to – I felt like there was too much emphasis on their history and their personality and not enough emphasis on the food, and and these episodes are sort of hit or miss for me. What did you think about that, or were you very much engaged by everyone's story?
Well, that's what I was talking about earlier when I said this was very much a documentary. Normally, we watch food shows, Chopped, Top Chef, Kitchen Nightmares, and Hell's Kitchen, and we look for the food, we look for the drama, we're looking to be in the moment. Whereas this is really a 30 to 40 minute presentation of some guy that a bunch of food critics fawn over, and they want us to know how special he is. And being from the industry, it's nice to see some of the top chefs, people that are considered the top chefs in the world, going through some of the same issues I went with when I was cooking.
I have to say, and you hit on a very good point there, the struggle was real for a lot of these folks. They didn't just, fall out of a tree and instantly create a Michelin star restaurant. And I think in a couple of these cases, they talked about going broke. They talked about, if you're playing the Radulich and Broadcasting Network home game, every time we draw a reference to wrestling, take a drink. It very much reminds me of the story of WrestleMania, where had the original WrestleMania not worked, the WWF was going out of business. That was it. It was all or nothing. And you get a sense of that with a couple of these chefs where they threw their life's blood and everything they had into creating these restaurants. And if they didn't work, that was it. They were done. And in some cases, that's exactly what happened. They would create a restaurant, it would go belly up, and they would have to go do something else for a while and then come back and try again. It speaks to the spirit of entrepreneurship and taking chances and whatnot. And I found that to be inspirational.
Oh, definitely. With Massimo, definitely so. The first restaurant, it didn't exactly go under. It was the one where he ended up becoming a bit of a social pariah in his own town because he took Mama's recipes and did them differently. And from what I understand, that's a huge no-no to Italians.
Right. We are nothing if not a stubborn people.
Oh yeah, my wife's Italian. I know. Been married 4 years. She still will not let me cook Italian for her. It's the only thing I am forbidden from making.
My best friend is very much like that. There's only one way to make sauce. If you make it another way, you're wrong. Before we move on to the next one, I just want to give you the final word here. Anything about this episode you want to talk about? Anything left unsaid?
I found it interesting that out of all the chefs, he was the only one that not only was he married, but his wife was his business partner. The story about how they met, how they got together, and then him calling her up at like 3 a.m. in New York to propose to her right before his restaurant opened.
Yeah,
that to me was
I always, as somebody who works in the field of mental health, psychology, I always find it interesting that you have these creative geniuses who have just no clue how to interact with other people. Yeah, it's just that he has this sort of frenetic, manic, way of thinking that it would make sense to him that as he has this thought, yeah, sure, call her up at 3 o'clock in the morning and propose to her. It makes total sense.
Oh yeah, I definitely identified with the story of them being at the movies. They leave the movies. She goes, "How'd you like it?" And he goes, "I don't know. I didn't pay attention. I was trying to figure out how to do this."
Right. That was great. All right, episode 2. We have Dan Barber and the Blue Hill Restaurant at Stone Barns in New York City, baby, New York City. Now, like I said, I feel like I've heard of Dan Barber before, and where I remember Dan Barber from, I could not tell you. But
I think he's involved with Blue Apron.
Okay, and maybe that's it. But I have watched a lot of documentaries about the food industry and, you know, how we went from farm to table to processed and preserved, and how we're trying to go back now to that because of the health crisis, quote unquote, in this country, where we've overstuffed ourselves on processed foods and we have rampant diabetes and obesity. And as somebody who has struggled with weight since high school, this is something I really did a deep dive into a few years ago, reading books, watching documentaries, the whole nine yards. So other than Massimo, I really enjoyed this episode because there's this focus on Dan Barber as the chef really focusing on ingredients and making sure he had the freshest, most seasonal ingredients and pushing that idea of, you know, farm to table, which is not easy, obviously, especially in this go-go world, you know, where you've got jobs and kids, and some of these things can just be unforgiving. We all don't have sometimes the opportunity to grow a garden in our backyard and make fresh food, and so you sometimes you have to make compromises. But I'm at least intrigued and inspired by those that do push themselves and put that message forward. So well, Dan's food in and of itself maybe not was, you know, as far as my personal taste go, might not have been as appealing as, say, Massimo's or Magnus's or Ben Shewry's, which we'll talk about as we go forward. But as far as pushing an ideal and maintaining a sense of integrity within the world of cooking, I was excited by what I was seeing. I very much enjoyed this episode. What did you think of Mr. Barber?
I found it very interesting. It was very refreshing to not only see a chef struggle in the kitchen itself, but also to be that involved with the production and cultivation of his own ingredients. His story is one of having this farm. He's like, okay, I'll grow the vegetables, I'll use the produce in my kitchen, and then he's like, well, I can't just have this because eventually all the nutrients will run out, so I need to get some livestock to create the fertilizer. Oh, I got this livestock now, okay, I'll use the protein. And it's one thing after another. Are you familiar with South Park at all?
I am. I love that show.
Remember the episode where Cartman gets a theme park?
Yes. Nobody can come in.
Basically, that episode is the story of Ben minus the no one can come in part.
Really? Okay.
Well, because as he found out, okay, I've got all this to myself. Oh, wait, I need this. Okay, to do this, I need to do this. To do this, I need to do this. And it's an ever-evolving chain of events that culminates in an end result that everyone enjoys.
The standout moment, believe it or not, for me in this entire episode, with my memory being what it is, it's not great. So if I can actually remember something in detail, I know it was truly meaningful to me. And the one part of this that truly stood out to me, you know, for the longest time I've been heavy on protein, and I've abandoned in a lot of ways grain in my diet. I read books like Wheat Belly and this Gary Taubes This Is Why We Get Fat and all that. And there's this, there's definitely a almost religious philosophy of you want to stick with your grain. You want to stick with your proteins and your leafy vegetables and stay away from your grains. Of course, there's also equally fervent religious philosophy out there of you want to stay away from your proteins and stick with your grains and your leafy greens. But that's a whole other category. It's a whole other podcast. In any case, so I'm not. Well, number one, I've never been a big fan of bread. It just got in the way of the meat. That's the problem. See, you're standing between me and my burger. You bread you. But he bakes this fresh bread, and he addresses the fact that yes, the bread that you buy in the grocery store for the most part is shit. But if there are grains, there are natural ingredients that you can make fresh bread with, and it's perfectly healthy and it's delicious. And he actually bakes two people this bread, and he's like showing them something on the iPad. And I remember thinking to myself, like, for a guy who's not a fan of bread, that looks delicious.
Oh yeah, it's amazing how someone can craft food in a way that you would not have thought palatable.
Yeah.
I looked at that bread and I'm like, I want to smell it, I want to touch it, I want to taste it.
A very similar thing. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, the ability to make your own bread is just my father actually was a bagel baker as I was growing up, and I learned that from him, and it's not the same as the bread that Ben makes, but the experience of taking all these different bits and putting it together into something, you get a sense of pride for it, and it just tastes that much better.
I had a very similar experience when I watched Michael Pollan's Cooked, because that gets broken up into the elements of cooking. So you have fire, you have air, and the air episode is the baking episode. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I'm not into this at all. I don't care. The fire episode was awesome. I don't care for this bread episode. And I had a friend of mine who watched it before I got a chance to, and he goes, don't be so sure you're not going to like it, because I guarantee you'll have the same reaction that I did, which is it's going to look so good to you that you're actually going to want to eat the bread. And he was not wrong. So you definitely eat with your eyes. Anything else on Dan Barber left unsaid that you want to address?
If he really is involved with Blue Apron, I think that's probably the most inspired move a professional chef could ever go into, because you're so confident in your craft and so passionate about farm to table that you're goading those who would come to your restaurant and pay obscene amounts of money for your food to do it at home and learn to do it themselves.
My wife and I have actually been toying around with the idea of doing one of these deals where, they send you a box of ingredients and you make food like that. And we actually were looking at Blue Apron. So I'm Googling it now to see if he's involved with that, if that's true. Blue Apron. Green Acres is the place to be. Let's see here. Dan Barber, Blue Apron. The Google machine's running a little slow tonight. All right. Well, this warms up, let's go ahead. Now, let's talk about this for just 1 second here. Francis Mallmann. Now, it could have been the fact that I was it could have been the fact that I was tired, I was not feeling well, it was dark out and there were wolves after me, but I did not like this fellow. And I think of all the episodes, I didn't, I don't know. I struggled with this guy, and I think part of it was that there comes a point where he's like talking about he has a kid with this woman, and he's like, well, we don't live together, and then he starts talking about like he can't stay in one place, and like this is where the pendulum swings too far in one direction. Well, you're so artsy, you're so creative that you can't handle normal human relationships to the detriment of those involved with you. And it's like, I get that you're a craftsman, and one of the shows I really enjoy is Man Fire Food. Again, I'm a big fan of grilling, and and this guy's enthusiasm. I don't know if you've ever seen the show before, but you know, he goes to all these different places, and you know, they build these elaborate fires and do all this awesome grilling. And there was a little bit of that in this episode as well, and I dug it. But it was like, okay, when he wasn't grilling fresh meat on a stick somewhere out in the, you know, in the far reaches of the world, it would go back to, yeah, I can't deal with people. I don't have time for this sort of thing. I was like, all right, Sushi, take it easy. That poor child you brought into this world. So I don't know. Am I being a little too hard on the beaver? What do you think?
That was one of the sticking points about this guy too, and I really wanted to like him because of the way the episode opened up with the wood burning grill, because that was one of my favorite memories from when I cooked professionally. I worked for a restaurant where we had one of those wood burning grills, and just to roll up to the restaurant, the smell of the burning wood would just permeate everywhere, and it mixed with the smell of the cooking meat, and it just got you going.
Mm-hmm.
And we would actually fight each other sometimes to be the ones to start the first fire of the day.
There's something primal about starting a fire. We used to have one of those like fire pits in the backyard, and I remember the first couple of times I did it, I was like, wow, this is fun. Like, I never thought of myself as somebody who would have fun starting a fire in a fire pit, but you know, I guess it's a sign that to some degree, a sign of maturity, a sign of, you know, getting older. You know, it can't all be rock concerts and whatnot. You know, there was a pride in owning my own home and having a fire pit in the backyard and starting a fire and, you know, being able to use it to do stuff. And so I'm with you there. There's an enthusiasm, a very primal enthusiasm for that sort of thing. And then this guy would fucking talk again.
Yeah.
You know,
and then he'd talk, and then he would talk about how he lived his life, and I'm instantly taken out.
Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely like, you know, like one of those dates where you're just like, you're so pretty, please stop talking. I don't remember a single fucking thing he cooked in this episode. And again, I'm not gonna blame David Gelb or Francis Mallmann for that. That might be my own fault. I was not in a good way the night that I watched this. But I mean, if you can,
the food was an afterthought.
Yeah, yeah, it really was.
They really wanted to highlight these kooky guys who have elevated the art of culinary to a new level. They wanted to have the food critics that have given them their great reviews to talk about them, talk about the person. The food is somewhat secondary. It's like at the end they show you all the dishes that he's famous for, as if to go, oh yeah, and he makes food.
In case you forgot what you were watching, here's a bunch of shit he cooked. None of which stood out to me. Did any of his food stand out to you? Because like I said, I might not have just been paying close enough attention. I might have gotten to a point where I said, I need to go to bed. I'm done with this. So I don't want to.
None of his dishes.
Okay. So it's not just me then. Yeah, Franz. I don't know if I ever end up in Argentina. I think I would have to go to his restaurant just because I'm sure it's delicious. I'm sure it's wonderful. But this episode didn't really do a lot for, going back to Massimo. I want to go to Modena, Italy, and go to Osteria Francescana. This next one, we're going to talk about Niki Nakayama, in Kana in Los Angeles. Yeah, hell yeah, I want to go eat there. Magnus Nilsson in Järpen, Sweden. Hell yeah, I want to eat at his restaurant. This guy, I didn't have that hell yeah feeling when this was all said and done.
With him it was more of a hell yeah, I want to do that.
Yeah. Episode 4, Niki Nakayama in Kana restaurant in Los Angeles. And I liked her story. We finally get since from the first episode another story where I could absolutely see, pick up what she was putting down. I could see where she was coming from. A little stereotypical in the in the sense that the poor Asian girl, you can't do what the men do. I have expected there to be a scene where her father's making a walk behind her or behind him or some shit. But I have to say, the human spirit and the desire to, defy the odds and push past the stereotypes and everything. I was very much inspired by her, and she made some damn fine looking food. Like, I don't go out of my way to eat sea urchin. But
the way it was presented was amazing.
Yeah, very artistic. I really dug it. What did you think of this episode?
I liked the story. It's just, it felt a little token, if that makes sense. She ticked a lot of boxes to make people happy. Woman, check. Minority, check. Comes out ahead in the end, check. Oppressive backstory, check.
You expected her
so
to
much.
There's a bunch of women protesting Donald Trump, carrying her on her shoulders, over the streets of Los Angeles. That's what we need to see at the very end of it.
Basically. I mean, even her attitude towards people knowing that she's the one cooking their food.
Mm-hmm.
I understand her reasoning for doing it because she wants the food to speak for itself, but I think we're at a point in society where anyone can do great things in the kitchen. It's the end product that is the reflection of us.
With all of the celebrity female chefs out there, is there still a prejudice in the kitchen against women? Because I just...
Oh, my God, yes.
Really? Talk to me about that for a moment. Let's put a hard break on this and talk to me about why. With not just the Martha Stewarts, but I mean, you have the one lady who does the Worst Cooks in America show that's been on for like 10 years now. You have Rachel Ray. You have the 97 different women who have come out of Top Chef and have gone on to do, really great things. And yet there's still a prejudice. Talk to me about that.
It has to do with how we are in a kitchen. When I first started learning how to cook, I actually learned from a female chef, and she did anything and everything to try and scare the crap out of me. One of the first things that she would talk about was how the line of a restaurant is akin to being in the belly of a submarine. It's small, it's cramped, everyone's heavily armed and pissed off.
Okay.
And there is that huge stigma that a woman can't hang with the men. We're tough as nails, rough and tumble. We'll shit talk each other. We'll pull pranks, and they women can't handle it. And I've experienced that in the kitchen both ways. I've experienced it where there's women that absolutely can go toe to toe with even the most pissed off guy, and then there's the very fragile woman who just can't. And unfortunately, it's the ones that can't that are the most well known.
Interesting.
In school, when the story of the woman that can't, there was a professor who owned several restaurants around Charleston. He was known for being a hard ass. If you screwed up, he let you know. She screwed up, he let her know. She went crying to the dean, and the professor was let go.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah.
Well, that's a problem.
And that's unfortunate.
In general. You can't actually teach anybody anything anymore, lest someone get their feelings hurt.
Right. But unfortunately, it's stories like that are more out there than, the women that can handle an entire line by themselves, get in the weeds and come out on top.
I can't believe it's 2017, and we are still dealing with that sort of thing. That's fascinating to me. I will say this: my brother-in-law is a professional chef, and he's worked in one of the best fine dining establishments in Tampa. And he was telling me, he was like, yeah, the kitchen is just, I don't know if he used the word toxic, but I will. It's just sort of this toxic environment of everyone sort of existing as a raw nerve, And if you,
he's not wrong.
And if you have thin skin, you're not going to last. The environment is not conducive to people who are mamby-pambies, whether you're a man or a woman. And I found that fascinating that, that's a consistent thing in kitchens across the country or, across the world. Anything else about the Nakayama episode?
Not really. I mean, it just like with Massimo's very inspiring story. It gives you hope that with the right emotional and financial backing, that you two can put forth. How to put it? It's cliche to say put forth your soul, but it's basically what we do. When you're cooking at a restaurant, that's your soul on a plate.
Right.
And back to the raw nerve thing, we're constantly seeking the approval of the customer.
Sure. All right. Admittedly, this next episode, the Ben Shewry episode, I was in and out of. It was just one of those days where I was on the couch and my attention was being pulled in a couple of different directions. So the parts that I remember, the parts that stood out to me were him talking about cooking with, really trying to make something of natural Australian ingredients. And I know at one point he was cooking kangaroo. And I tell you, as somebody who's a big fan of game meat, and, if I ever was able to open up a restaurant, it would absolutely be a game meat restaurant. I was like, yes, cook more kangaroo. Outstanding. What was your take on Mr. Ben Shewry in this episode? What did you like? What didn't you like? Again, with my attention being not really where it should have been with this episode, what's some of the good stuff I missed here?
This one was the one that talks about the overarching fear of going broke and going under. Part of his story was buying a restaurant that was already failing and then racking up I think he said $150,000 worth of debt to his vendors because he, like all great chefs, would not sacrifice his vision for something that's stable in a restaurant where no one was coming. And
what was he trying? What was he doing that? What was he doing that wasn't working initially? In other words, what was the problem that was causing him to lose money initially?
From what I remember, he just said nobody was coming to the restaurant. They would get up early in the morning, they'd prep the line, they'd open the doors for dinner, and crickets.
That's heartbreaking. So what turned it around for him?
On Tuesdays, a notoriously slow day for restaurants, he turned that into one of his best days by being completely experimental. I think that's where he said he started cooking with the kangaroo because there's no cookbook for kangaroo. You can't Google how to cook kangaroo. So he got inventive, and Tuesdays was his day to cut loose. And I think the one food critic that they spotlighted for his episode was like, yeah, when you go in on Tuesdays, your life is in the hands of God.
Okay. And I guess just the word got out that Tuesdays is fun days, and the popularity blossomed out of that.
Yeah, and I can only gather that what worked made it onto the menu, what didn't work went back to the drawing board. It's not dropped completely.
This is the worst tasting kangaroo I've ever had. Tasmanian devil, are you crazy? Okay. I don't have a lot of input on this one other than ID kangaroo. Sure, absolutely. Australia is on the list of places I want to go. His restaurant is definitely one I would check out, and that's really my only input into this episode. So with that being said, that takes us to our final episode, Mr. Awesome Name, Magnus Nilsson from Järpen, Sweden. And this was one where my wife was on the couch, and at the end of it, I just read her everything that that they were spotlighting at the end. I was like, this looks awesome, and has some of the worst names I've ever, Grouse. There was a couple of Pasty Paste. That was another one. I think that sounds like something you would sell a kid. But I liked his story. He just sort of this uncompromising. They said at the beginning of the episode, and I thought this was hilarious. They're like, nobody comes here, so there's really nobody around. There's no influence. There's no one around to tell you, well, you're doing it wrong, or you should do it a different way. And he's just making these traditional dishes the way he wants to do them. And the other thing I thought was really fascinating about this, sort of taking it back to the conversation about Dan Barber, is, he's using local ingredients in an unforgiving, frigid wasteland where nothing grows half the year. And so he, and we talk about the word preservative, and it's just got this evil connotation to it, but it comes out of necessity. It comes out of the fact that there are parts of this world where you had to store food for the winter. And so the idea of preserving food isn't inherently bad. It's all in how you do it. So do you use this, chemical that, maybe in large quantities harmful to you? Or do you do it in this more traditional way, where they're salting meat and they're jarring food and storing it in a root cellar? I was really fascinated by that. I was fascinated by all of that because, again, it is a reminder. Go ahead.
You there?
No, go ahead. You started to chime in with something. Go ahead.
I started laughing because I wanted to say, why'd you say the same thing twice? Do you want to use a chemical to preserve the food, or do you want to use a chemical to preserve the food?
Fair enough.
Because that's what salt, technically the salt is. It's a nice chemical formula and it's used to preserve the food.
Touche, sir. Touche. But I like that. I mean, maybe my thought about this is wrong, but I feel like there was a very natural way of preserving the food that isn't terrible versus our modern way of preserving food, to make it last on store shelves, ad infinitum, which can be terrible. At least that's what I've seen in every documentary I've watched.
Oh yeah, when they showed his root cellar, I'm like, oh my God, I would kill for a root cellar.
See, it's great, wasn't it? What'd you think of this episode?
Oh yeah, I thought it was great. It in a world where the biggest thing used to be the gastropubs where food was deconstructed or presented in ways that the chef's coat was more of a lab coat when you're presented something like Caesar salad and liquidized in different test tubes, and you have to eat them in a certain way to understand it. This guy goes all the way back to how the pilgrims used to have to do stuff to survive.
Right.
Something that was done out of necessity, he does not just to honor tradition, but also to simplify his craft.
Yeah, I was really into it. I liked what the one teacher was saying about him. Everyone reads cookbooks.
Oh, yeah.
But he would just create things and experiment, and he didn't want to be pushed into a corner or boxed in by other people's ideas. He wanted to create something from his own imagination. And I tell you, I think that's the thing I enjoy most about watching a lot of these cooking shows is when you're given the task of creating something out of the ether, and people come up with some wickedly fun ideas. One of the things about Top Chef is, at the beginning of the season, you can really separate the wheat from the chaff, in the sense that you have these really, really talented people, who excel at the top of the season, and the other ones are going to get cut because they're just like, I came up with ham and cheese. It's like, all right. And then the flip side of that is at the end of the season, people are just burnt the fuck out. So you have these very creative people who are just like, yeah, I went with the ham and cheese too now because God, 8 weeks of this? Ugh. But there's always somebody out there who comes up with this wicked, these crazy ideas. So this episode was a lot of fun, and it's definitely a restaurant that if I can ever get to Sweden, I would check out. What's give me the final word here, sir, on this episode and really in general on Chef's Table? As we say on the Rattleton Broadcasting Network, take me home, baby, take me home.
One of the quotes that I definitely took away from this was when he talked about how he almost, can't remember if it was him or if it was Kay, who basically was planning to give up on cooking, the notion that if all you do is make someone else's dish, what are you doing? And I think that's for me, that's part of the reason why I got out, because I lost my inspiration. Cooking here in kitchens in America, you have a set menu, a set recipe, a set plating. You can't even be unique in that. With Massimo, oops, I dropped the lemon tart. Something like that happened in a U.S. kitchen these days? No, the waiter would go out and apologize, saying, "Oh, we only have one lemon tart now." And that was always my passion in cooking, not just creating the dish, but using the plate as my canvas and creating this very artistic thing that you see it and instantly you want this.
Do you still cook at home? Are you into creating at home now that you have sort of an open canvas to play on? Or do you just okay. You've escaped the plantation
Italian,
and now you're
my
free,
wife
huh?
doesn't come in.
Very good. It's I said whatever you. I always encourage people because sort of take this all the way back around again. People find out in my profession or in my social life that I do podcasts, and first of all, I always love the reaction to that because it's like alchemy to them. It's like, you do podcasts? How? Like, I fucking dial a number and I just talk. It's not that hard. But to people who I guess are not used to it or are just not like tech savvy, this is just magic. And I say to them, like, look, podcasting is my creativity. This is my outlet. This is how I'm able to express myself so that I don't go crazy. And everyone should have that in their life. There should be a place for them to just let their hair down and experiment and express themselves and get that kind of energy out of their system, so that they can redirect the rest of their energy into other things in life, whether it's family or your profession or what have you. Now, if you're lucky enough to be able to express yourself in your profession, well, hot damn, aren't you, the bee's knees? But for a lot of us, we have jobs, and then what do you do with the rest of your time? And I think, for those people who are talented enough and lucky enough to be, artistic in the kitchen, I envy folks like yourself and, and the people in Chef's Table, because you're really able to express your creativity in something that, like, who doesn't like to eat? You know what I mean? We all have to eat. We gotta live. We gotta eat. And you're able to take that sort of mundane activity and make it wonderful. So I applaud you. In general, Chef's Table I thought was fun. I'm anxious to check out season 2 later on in the year. And I know season 3 just dropped on Netflix not that long ago. They're all 6 episodes, and I think there's a Chef's Table France that's 4 episodes long. So at some point in the future on the Radulich Broadcasting Network, we'll do more of these Chef's Table seasons. But for the time being, I think we have drawn this conversation to a close. Mr. Roth, I want to thank you for being on here and talking about this with me. Did you have fun tonight? Was this enjoyable for you?
Oh, this was a lot of fun. Talking about whenever you're talking about your passion, it's easy to get kind of wrapped up in it, and I enjoy the opportunity to share my passion with others and hopefully impart on them the spark to go on their own journey, whether it be with cooking or with podcasting or whatever outlet they feel they can tap into.
So I'll have to tap you again when we tackle these Chef's Table seasons in the future.
Oh, I'll be here.
All right. Real quick, at the end of every one of my podcasts, I allow my guests and I go for myself the opportunity to plug any projects you're involved with or ways to contact you. Some people, they're just like, I'm on Twitter. That's about it. But other people have some other stuff going on. So I'm going to go ahead and just throw you the floor here. If there's anything you would like to plug, even if it's a service that you're passionate about or whatever it is you want people to know about, this is your time to just quick do some plugs here, let people know, and then I'll do my thing, and then I think we'll be out.
Well, I'm not doing anything personally. I mentioned that I went to a culinary college called Johnson & Wales. You don't have to go to a big university to get the kind of experiences that I had. I started out very young. I fell into cooking, and I fell in love. I found my passion, but I knew I needed proper training. You can find cooking classes anywhere. Don't be afraid to try something new just because you think it might not taste good, you think you might look silly doing it. Just get out and try it. Try something new. I'm on Twitter. I've had that Twitter since Twitter started, and I called myself Chef M80.
Okay. All right.
It was weird.
All right. Once again, thank you for being on. This year has been an interesting one because when I started opening up my Blog Talk Radio account for other people to do shows, it was a very kind of closed system of people that I would get involved with. It was basically the guys I knew from 401 Mania. This year has I sort of just kind of opened up the doors and like, anyone wants to talk to me about anything at all, fucking I'm open. You know, the limitations are off the table. And it's funny, I didn't think I would get people interested in wanting to, but you and a coworker of mine, people have been knocking on my door. Fuck, the one time I said, hey, anybody up for doing some TV parties, and I got bombarded. Hello, me. What about me, boss? So I'm excited about this year and giving more people an opportunity to come on and talk, and give voice to people who would not have normally gone on a podcast. They just wouldn't have thought about it. So I'm glad I'm able to give people that opportunity in my little corner of the internet. And speaking of my little corner of the internet, in the archives on the Radulich and Broadcasting Network, on source material hosted by the great Jesse Starcher, we discussed Batman 66 Volume 1, wherein I also did a mini review of the Lego Batman movie. Of course, tonight was TV Party, Chef's Table. Tomorrow night on the Metal Hammer of Doom, we've got my friend Frank Moravsky from high school. We were in a band together. He, of course, is in an actual band now, one that's, had success. It's called If He Dies, and their album Beneath the Waves. We're going to go ahead and review that. It's going to be a lot of fun. 9 o'clock, assuming Mr. Cooper actually gets out of work on time. If He Dies, Beneath the Waves, Metal Hammer of Doom. And then on trial this week, myself and Sean Comer, we will be putting Catwoman with Halle Berry on trial. I will be defending. Sean will be prosecuting. And I will show the world that there is something defensible about Halle Berry's Catwoman, besides the fact that she has a very nice chest. So that's what we got going on this week on the old network. Next week, we've got the TV Party tonight. A week from tonight, Pat Mullen will be back on. We'll be doing some sex and drugs and rock and roll from good old Dennis Leary. Further celebrating sex and drugs and rock and roll, the Metal Hammer of Doom will be reviewing Steel Panther's Lower the Bar. And on Thursday, because Winfrey made me, we're going to review the movie Ink. I know nothing about this movie, but a lot of people lined up when I threw that idea out there to make me watch some shit I would never watch. So we're going to watch Ink and review it. And then we have a big show on Friday. It's the announcement of Wolverine Week and our character discussion in celebration of the movie Logan, which will be coming out that day, and we'll be discussing all things Wolverine the following week. So we'll talk a little bit more about that next week. Again, I want to thank Mark Roth for coming on, and we will see you next week. Be well, be safe, and behave.